think that people who purchase Bitcoin feel like Coinbase or other exchanges that with your you personally as an individual that these individuals are going to be targeted?
Do I think that individuals purchasing Bitcoin are going to be targeted? Absolutely not. No. I think the type of pressure you're going to see is going to be much more subtle than that. And it's only going to come through the traditional banking and banking regulation system. I don't think consumers of Bitcoin have anything to fear at all. I'm not taking in data across borders, and I'm keeping my nose clean because I have a public profile. But other than a handful of people who have a public profile of Bitcoin, nobody has to worry about Bitcoin being illicit. Not here. In fact, a legal fight against Bitcoin is extremely unlikely at that level, and the reason is because it's very likely that they might lose such a legal fight. There are certain principles in the First Amendment that would allow you to use a currency of your choice. And that's a precedent they don't want to lose, because losing that then establishes firmly and legally the right to own currency. Much better to keep it gray for now. Another question? Yes?
Just to second your observation on China, Russia appears to be in a fairly similar situation where Russia today, Max Kaiser seems to be very pro-Bitcoin and...
right, so Russia Today has now done hours, and I've been on Russia Today 4 times talking about Bitcoin, and I've only been on US television stations once or twice. It's a very different environment, and again, it is cynical, calculated, political, nasty, and it works in our favor, so I'll take it.
Yep. And Russian people what money if they do accept the Bitcoin, so you can exchange it for Bitcoin.
So let's talk a bit about international adoption, because this has a lot to do with network neutrality. There's this weird assumption that we're going to adopt Bitcoin here first. Why? Because we have the technology, because we're modern, enlightened people who are the cutting edge of technology. We live in the Silicon Valley after all, we must be enlightened. So we're going to adopt Bitcoin first, and it's going to start here. And that assumption is entirely wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because there are 4 basic preconditions to adopting Bitcoin. And while we have all of them, we lack the most important, which is incentive. So the first one is the marginal utility of Bitcoin versus your local currency. The second one is that Bitcoin is neutral towards your religion, language, and culture. Right? You can't adopt something that offends your religion. And that's pretty good. We actually, Bitcoin is Sharia compatible. It's compatible with the Jewish religion and the celebration of the Sabbath. You can use Bitcoin in certain ways to be compatible with most any culture. The third precondition is infrastructure, and that starts with electricity, not internet, but electricity, and smartphones and various other things. And the fourth thing is fear, right? If I hold Bitcoin in North Korea, I die. So I'm not going to adopt Bitcoin in North Korea. So you have to find that special tipping point where the marginal utility of the currency is great enough, the infrastructure is there, it's not offensive to your culture, and you're not terrified you're going to get shot for owning Bitcoin. And while we may think that those things are strong here, the most important one, which is marginal utility versus your currency, is completely missing. Bitcoin is not better than the US dollar. Sorry to say, it's not. It might be in 5 years, without a doubt. It's on a trajectory that's going to overtake the US dollar. But if you were to stack rank 191 national currencies in terms of utility, value, attractiveness, Bitcoin probably beats 50 or 60 of them right off the bat. But the US dollar is at the top. You can use it in any country in the world. It has value because everybody holds their reserves in it. It's accepted by everyone, everywhere. You don't have to convert dollars into foreign currency when you travel, right? No other country gets to do that. You can't just show up in somebody else's country and say, hey, this is nice, this Florida Disneyland you have here. I have Canadian money. Will you take it? No, they won't. But if you show up in the middle of, I don't know, Hungary, in Budapest as I did, with dollars, they'll take them. They'll take them at 3 times face value. So the point being, dollars do not win. Or rather, Bitcoin does not win over dollars. So there's 190 other countries. And for most of those countries, the people who live there are accustomed to a very different financial situation than we are. Their government regularly steals their money, regularly inflates their currency into nothing. And they're also comfortable using multiple currencies. They're comfortable with legal uncertainty. Frankly, they're comfortable with bribing the officials they need to bribe to get around problems. I've lived like that in Eastern Europe, and it's a normal part of life. By the age of 14, I knew how to exchange money on the black market. Right? Tell me how many Americans know how to exchange money on the black market. See, that is an adoption accelerator right there. You have a question?
Yeah, so China has one of the biggest US dollars reserves.
China has the biggest US dollar reserves. Yeah.
So why would China be pushing for Bitcoin?
Because they have to have those dollar reserves in order to buy oil. And if they could avoid having those dollar reserves, they would. Quite honestly, because it costs them geopolitically far more than it's worth in terms of money. So the problem is that China has to use a currency in order for practical reasons, but for strategic reasons, their use of that currency underpins your lifestyle. And without their use of that currency, bye-bye American lifestyle. We simply can't afford it. Yes?
You said that Bitcoin would be adopted last year in the U.S. because we're the world's reserve currency.
It might be adopted, but it will not knock the dollar off its pedestal anytime soon.
But one thing that Bitcoin is very good at is allowing you to move funds across international borders freely and at very fine granularity without getting caught with taxes or other types of uncomfortable speed bumps. If that were true to a much wider scale than it is today, then you think that that would accelerate adoption here?
It will accelerate adoption here. So what we will see in the U.S. is outside-in adoption. What we will see is U.S. companies using Bitcoin to interact with their international partners because they have adopted Bitcoin faster than you'll see it here. Honestly, I do think that's going to be the case. Already, the regulatory environment is highly hostile. The banking environment is very difficult. So you need these compelling reasons. Otherwise, Bitcoin is just a fad to us. From a business perspective, unless you're investing in it as an entrepreneur, it doesn't really make sense. And forget the cupcake company that says we take Bitcoin and gets 1 million people in a Washington Post write-up. You can only do that in the first year. Afterwards, you can't really accelerate that adoption without having a compelling advantage. So let me talk about what the two major applications of Bitcoin as a currency are today. The two killer applications are two massive flows of international money. The first one is foreign remittances, and the second one is capital flight. And in order to understand how Bitcoin is adopted, you need to understand how those two need to balance each other out. If we try to start using Bitcoin to send money from here to other countries, essentially replacing Western Union and allowing itinerant and migrant workers to send money home, the problem is you'd run out of Bitcoin buyers on the other end pretty quickly. What you need is people willing to buy large amounts of Bitcoin, and fortunately they exist. They're the rich running away. So what you do is for every 10,000 migrants on this end, you find one rich person on the other end who's trying to run away from currency controls. And those two flows balance out. If we start those flows up in a couple of different countries, you will see Bitcoin accelerate beyond what we can even imagine right now. 3 weeks. And almost all of that has to do with international adoption of Bitcoin. It is accelerating like you cannot imagine. So it's already not about us. You have a question?
Yeah. First off, great summary, great analysis of some of the geopolitical reasons, some of the geopolitical issues, I guess, surrounding Bitcoin. So what are your thoughts on Bitcoin becoming, so right now we're obviously a very speculative currency, it's a very speculative thing, and it maybe soon becomes store of value of some sort. What are your thoughts on legitimacy of Bitcoin becoming a transactional currency, and what do you see some of the hurdles are? Because Bitcoin now, obviously, wouldn't function very well, even if all the infrastructure for transactional currency existed.
Bitcoin now functions as well as Usenet before DNS functioned. It was better than everything that came before, but it was nowhere near where it needed to be for consumer adoption. We have a long way to go for that. But in terms of legitimacy, quite honestly, I don't give a damn. I do not give a damn about legitimacy of Bitcoin in the eyes of anyone. Because Bitcoin doesn't need legitimacy. Bitcoin is a solution to an actual problem.
That's good.
And it works. And it is unstoppable technologically. So we don't need permission from anyone. And if we are worried about legitimacy here, you have to realize that in many countries it's a much bigger problem, and yet they're not worried too much about it. So I think that's very much a preoccupation in the American environment.
Yeah, great point. Maybe legitimacy is the wrong word to use, but I would say maybe the utility of Bitcoin as a transactional currency. I mean,
so at the moment, yes, that's a
that-
very good point.
Right.
So Bitcoin as a currency has two aspects. One is as a transactional or exchange mechanism, exchange value, and the other one is a store of value. Today, Bitcoin is used almost entirely as an exchange of value for those using it for payments, and it's used as a speculative instrument which isn't a store of value. It is a wild, wild casino ride for those who are interested in speculation. As an exchange of value, Bitcoin is poor at the moment, and part of the reason that it's poor, there's two issues. One is the exchange rate, and the other one is the volatility among international currencies. I mean, you can't even get a clear price. How much is Bitcoin today? Yeah. Well, let's ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different exchanges, and then notice the spread, right? 386 at the top, 330 at the bottom, right? That's a $56 spread. It's ridiculous. Right, so why do we have a $56 spread? Well, as always, it's fiat's fault. Bitcoin's working fine. If you want to do arbitrage between these exchanges, you could easily move Bitcoin. And in fact, during the big run-up, what we saw is the gap between Mt. Gox and Coinbase shrunk to almost nothing because as soon as Coinbase price got closer, people started moving Bitcoin out to Mt. Gox, and a lot of the US dollar hangover had already gone. Now it's increasing again. What this represents is not a difficulty in Bitcoin, but a difficulty in moving dollars between these exchanges. And other currencies, but primarily dollars.
Yeah.
You don't see these kinds of spreads in the other currencies. They're much, much narrower if you switch to one of the other side. So at the moment, if you want to use Bitcoin transactionally, you have to hold it like a hot potato for the minimum amount of time you can to minimize the exposure to volatility in the exchange rate. I pay contractors